Come along with us as we explore the broad world of preservation and the work being done to preserve, interpret, and save our past in a 21st century world. From aquaculture to historic foodways to forensic modeling, we're talking weekly with experts from across the globe. This is your host, Nick Redding. Welcome to PreserveCast. This is Nick Redding. You're listening to PreserveCast. Thrilled to be sitting down with one of our colleagues from the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. We're going to be talking about some of the amazing work that's gone into understanding, exploring, and interpreting a new historic site at Colonial Williamsburg, which sounds a little bit like an oxymoron, but stick with us here. We're going to talk all about the Bray School and the one of America's oldest, if not the oldest, black school located at Colonial Williamsburg, and the work that went into finding that. We're sitting down with the executive director of the Foundation's Department of Archaeology, and we're going to be talking with Jack Gary all about the work that went into this. But before we get into that, we love to get to know the people that we're talking to. So, Jack, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get involved into this field, and what made you decide you wanted to become an archaeologist?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Great question. And most people assume that it's Indiana Jones, but it wasn't. Matter of fact, when people bring that up, I say that as a kid, when I would watch Indiana Jones, I never realized he was an archaeologist. So that wasn't what got me into this. And it was from a young age, though. I got into archaeology, really young, and got to give my parents a lot of credit when they recognized that I grew up in Roanoke, Virginia, in the southwest part of the state, and there was an archaeological excavation being conducted on the Roanoke River. I must have been between 8 and 10, and they I don't even know how they learned about it, but they said, "Hey, let's go check it out. Let's go see what they're doing. You're interested in this." And the archaeologists on site, they saw me lingering around the edges, and they said, "Hey, hey kid, come on to the site here," and put a trowel in my hand, and they let me dig next to the professional archaeologist, and I just thought I was the coolest thing in the world, and that was it. That hands-on, tactile experience. It was a pre-contact or pre-European settlement site, and so there was thousands of years old artifacts coming out of the ground. It was everything I thought archaeology could be. Outside digging, old stuff, loved it, and that was it. And so, was hooked, and just continued to, as I went through my education, just kept asking people, where do I go to college? Okay, but you go to William and Mary if you want to go to be an archaeologist. So I went to William and Mary. Okay, well, where do I go to graduate school? Well, there's a lot of places, but a great one's at University of Massachusetts, Boston. Okay, I'll go there. So I went to UMass Boston and did my graduate work there. So, this is one of those things where I wanted to do it for a long time. And once I started doing it, there's just no stopping. I love it.
Yeah, well, I guess this is, we always talk about this, like what gets people into the things that they're into and what aspect or sliver of preservation they found themselves in. And oftentimes it is some adult takes them to something and they just get hooked. So this is a reminder, take your kids to archaeological sites if you want them to turn into an archaeologist.
Yeah, which is why I don't take my kids to archaeological sites.
You take them to banks and hospitals.
Yeah, there you go. That's right.
So where did you, obviously you didn't become immediately the director of archaeology at the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. Where did you get your start, at least professionally? Were you a shovel bum, sort of crisscrossing the country, excavating sites? What was your path to where you sit today?
Yeah. I was a shovel bum. Did the shovel bum thing right after graduating from William and Mary, and it was lucky because William and Mary has its own. The College of William and Mary here in Williamsburg has its own contract firm, the Center for Archaeological Research, and I just got on with them, and we did contract work all over the state of Virginia, doing everything from excavating 1940s privies at mill housing in Danville, Virginia, to looking for submerged prehistoric sites in the Chesapeake Bay. It was just a wide range of sites that were just a blast to work on. But you get to the point where you realize if I want to be asking the questions, or if I want to be in charge, I need to get a graduate degree. Went to Boston, as I said, went there, and then worked in New England doing projects through UMass Boston. And then after that, the first real professional job was as the director of archaeology and landscapes for Thomas Jefferson's Poplar Forest, which is Jefferson's second home and plantation and retreat house in Bedford County, Virginia, about 90 miles south of Monticello, and came there and directed the archaeological excavations that were part of the restoration of that property, which has been ongoing since the 1980s and is a fascinating project, and directed those excavations looking at a variety of different aspects of Poplar Forest, including understanding the enslaved population that was there as part of the plantation, as well as looking at the ornamental landscape that Jefferson designed to go around the retreat house, which it was long gone. That his garden design was long gone, but it was just an integral part of the design of his retreat. And so we used archaeology to look for the planting beds, the planting stains, to start recreating the plantings and the gardens that surrounded the retreat house. And that's an ongoing project. It's going to go on for many years. It's a big one, but I got it started. I'm happy to say, to get it to the point of actually recreating the portions of the garden there around the house. So. And that was just an amazing project and property to work on. And then the opportunity came up at Colonial Williamsburg, and there's just, an entire city. An entire city is my playground now in the world of archaeology. So it was just, there's no way I could resist not coming here.
Yeah, and it seems like it's sort of unique. I mean, there's a lot of different ways in which archaeology is deployed. I mean, probably the vast majority of it is for compliance, to comply with some sort of law. And so the kind of research archaeology opportunities that you're getting to do that then informs restoration or rehabilitation of a resource is, I would presume, kind of unique in the world of archaeology. I mean, there's some of it happening, but I mean, you found two very unique positions. Would you suggest, I mean, for people who aren't familiar with how archaeology or why it's practiced, would this be a unique version of it?
Yeah, there's not many examples of this. You're right. I mean, there's only a handful of institutions that have the ability to bring on their own archaeology departments specifically to use it as research to understand that specific property, and then to lead towards either restoration of a resource, recreation of a resource, or just the interpretation of the resource. So, yeah, and Virginia is kind of the bed of that, with historical archaeology anyway, with the presidential homes all having their own archaeology departments, and then of course Colonial Williamsburg. So yeah, I mean we're kind of in it here in Virginia, and Colonial Williamsburg has been doing it, at least archaeology anyway, for the longest of any of the institutions, starting in 1928. That was the first excavations here at Colonial Williamsburg, and it's been ongoing, continuous ever since. It hasn't stopped since 1928. So, I mean, as you can imagine, that's a lot of data. That's a lot of artifacts. and currently the count is over 60 million in our collection here at Colonial Williamsburg, which is just staggering and kind of keeps me up at night.
Yeah, that is a lot. And obviously, or maybe not obvious, but I know that there's an archaeological exhibition building being constructed right now, which is pretty amazing. So that'll come online. We'll have to have you back to talk all about that, because that's a story all unto itself. But we're closing in, or you're closing in, I should say, on 100 years of archaeology at Colonial Williamsburg, in 2028. And I'm sure, or perhaps some people listening are thinking, well, you've had 100 years to do this. What could you possibly be finding that's new? Give people a sense for the scale of what has been accomplished. Obviously, you said 60 million objects and artifacts brought out of the ground, but what percentage of just the total acreage at Colonial Williamsburg has even been investigated in those 100 years?
We estimate that only about 30% of the 300 acres of the historic area has been excavated in any sort of systematic modern way. So that's an important distinction there. The majority of Colonial Williamsburg in the city has been looked at archaeologically, but in not the systematic way that we deploy today. And so the earliest excavations were focused on just finding architectural resources, and they did that by digging trenches, just cross-trenching all the lots in town, looking for brick foundations of 18th century structures. Once found, they would then recreate those buildings based on the archaeological data. But those trenches don't cover the entire lot. They're just these thin slips that go all the way across the lot. And there's and they were only looking for brick foundations. So anything else was left behind. And so these lots might have been looked at. We might know about them, at least have a pretty good sense of what was standing on them. However, not every single one of them, actually most of them, have not been looked at in terms of, again, bringing modern archaeology to bear on it, finding the features that excite us today, everything from, the middens to to planting stains to the things that really start to help us understand all the details of the property. So those things are still there. And we've got the opportunity, because they didn't fully excavate everything early on, we can now come back to all these sites with new questions. And I think that's the other important part about this, is how archaeology has changed here at Colonial Williamsburg, not just in terms of its techniques, but also in terms of the questions that we're asking today and how that's changed. And you can really track kind of the progression of the wider field of historical archaeology by looking at Colonial Williamsburg and the questions that have been asked, starting with in the 1920s up into the 1940s, 50s. It was just all about find buildings that we can then recreate in order to recreate the colonial city, the colonial capital of Virginia, and make it look like it did. And then in the 1950s, with Ivor Hume, the director of archaeology, coming in, it then changed more towards, okay, well, what are people doing here, and kind of the everyday lives? What are the things that filled their everyday lives? So looking at tradespeople, looking at kind of middle class, and even starting to look at enslaved individuals and trying to understand their lives. And material culture then becomes a really big part of it. So the artifacts, which is kind of funny for, I think, a lot of people to think about, early excavations, the artifacts weren't part of this. But 1950s all the way into, well, even today, it's what do the artifacts tell us about the people? And it kind of started with use these materials to then populate the houses we've just rebuilt, put the things back inside the houses that we've just rebuilt, and really convey daily life here in Williamsburg. And then today, I would characterize what we're doing today as much more community-based in how we work. And there are several projects, the Bray School project and the First Baptist Church project being the two great examples of that. Okay, we understand that we work within communities that are still here, and so we need to tailor our excavations. We need to tailor our research questions based on what the community is telling us they want to know about these sites. So we really do kind of track the full progression of archaeology here at Colonial Williamsburg. I'm happy to say that we're now in this more community engaged part of the project.
Right, which is, I mean, we've talked to a couple different archaeologists, and they've talked about how that's really like the sort of the industry at its best is engaging in those conversations. And I was in Colonial Williamsburg this spring, I guess I should say. And I know you have some excavations going on, and they're engaging with the public there. And I was taken by sort of the complexity of the questions, and sort of not trying to tell people all the answers, but sort of like, here's the questions we're asking. And like, here's this complex social network that was established in this community that we didn't really, sometimes weren't aware of, people buying property from other people, and the role women played in property, and the role that they're, maybe a husband who's passed away, and what happens to that property, and how the enslaved are tied into this story. And the Bray School seems like a perfect example. You mentioned that, and I know that for Juneteenth, Colonial Williamsburg has a bunch of sort of big next steps happening for the story of the Bray School. We've had some people on earlier to talk about Bray, but I think it's interesting from this perspective of how archaeology aided in its not only its discovery, but then in the interpretation. So tell us a little bit about that. How did they find the Bray School, and what role did archaeology have in not only finding it, but then determining where it should eventually be taken to on site?
Yeah, we found the building, and it was really a collaborative effort between Colonial Williamsburg and the College of William and Mary, and several individuals. But the building itself, for a period of time, was thought to be gone, having been moved from its original lot on Prince George Street, and then repurposed as a building for the College of William and Mary, and then it was clad in all these additions to it. And so this building that we would have looked like an 18th century building now did not look anything like an 18th century building. So it's just kind of sitting there waiting to be rediscovered. And it was only through dendrochronology, and actually, Terry Myers and also members of Colonial Williamsburg's architectural preservation team really thinking, we really need to make sure that building is or is not the Bray School. And the only way to do it is to get good dates on it. And so through dendrochronology, it was conclusive that the timbers for the building had been cut in late 1759, early 1760, and we know that the school starts to operate out of this building in 1760. So it all fit, and so once we had the building, the question for archaeology became more about, and we couldn't do archaeology on the building itself on its original site because a dormitory was sitting, a three-story massive brick dormitory was sitting on top of it. So we couldn't actually go try and find the original foundations of the original site. But we had the whole backyard, what would have been the whole yard space around the Bray School. That was still there. It was not covered over by any modern development. And so the question then turned, at least for archaeology, away from confirming whether it's the Bray School. Okay, we knew we had the Bray School and we knew its original lot, to what information can archaeology gather that can help us to understand the lives of the students, the both enslaved and free Black students that were going to the school. Are there any archaeological deposits that we can tie to the school period that'll give us a glimpse into their lives, so that we can then interpret that at the new site? So for listeners, the building, once discovered, we picked it up and we moved it to another site at Colonial Williamsburg, so that it can be interpreted, restored, and interpreted, the story of the school to our guests. We couldn't obviously move it back to its original site again because the dorm was on top of it. So we chose another site in Williamsburg that we now believe is very close to where the school moved to in its second iteration. So it's a really complex story, but the goal of archaeology, kind of getting back to that, has been to try and understand through the features and through the artifacts what was life like for these students, as young as 3 to up to 10, coming to this school every day and being taught. What were their lives like? So getting back to that question of daily life, can we understand daily life of these students?
That's fascinating. And so for those keeping track, I guess this is its third location now. It just is.
Yes, that's right. It's third location.
Yeah, it's a movable structure. So, although it took great effort, I know, to get it into its third location, and it's there and been reestablished. I guess one question I have is, and that people might have, is, Colonial Williamsburg rebuilt a lot of structures in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and even since then. Was Bray one that ever was considered, or was there just not enough known about it? Why has it taken so long, I guess some people might ask, for this structure to become part of the exhibits at Colonial Williamsburg?
Yeah, because it was lost, and its original site was covered with something else. It wasn't actually, the original site wasn't owned by Colonial Williamsburg. It was owned by the college. And so yeah, it was never really on the list to recreate. The history of the school was known, but it was never on the list to recreate. So its discovery and the fact that we don't have to recreate it, we have to just restore the building, because the building is still there, allowing us to, just to have now 89 original structures from the 18th century. I mean, that was the game changer. That was the game changer. Never really on the list to recreate, though.
And so I guess that opens up a whole set of new questions about, like, life at this school, what life looked like at this school, and the people who lived there. And you mentioned sort of working with descendant communities. Are there descendants of the Bray School that are going to be coming back? I know it's happening around Juneteenth, which is a fitting time for this, one of the earliest, if not the earliest, Black school in America, sort of being reestablished in a historic form on the campus of Colonial Williamsburg. But talk to us about descendant communities, and I know that obviously also played a big role in First Baptist Church, and we can talk about that too. Yeah,
absolutely, and with Bray descendants and really their histories, their family histories, and their connections to the students are incredibly important to the interpretation of the building, and layering those stories in, and not making this just a static. The school was open, and then it closed in 1774. End of the story. No, I mean it has a legacy that went beyond its closure, and still persists in community memory and descendants' memories today. And so to be able to incorporate that into the interpretation at the site itself when we reopen the building will be incredibly important and incredibly powerful. And I think we're still working through what all that will look like from a practical standpoint. But here's an opportunity for us to continue partnering with the College of William and Mary, who's been collecting all these oral histories from the descendants and tracking the genealogies of the students to be able to try and find more descendants. So we've got a great partnership here to be able to, we at Colonial Williamsburg are doing what we do best, which is research into the buildings, research into the daily lives, into the history. And William and Mary is continuing to take their research forward on the genealogy side of it and the history of the individual. So it's a great story of partnerships. And then you mentioned the First Baptist Church, what we now refer to as the African Baptist Meeting House site, which for listeners, this is the site of the oldest Black Baptist congregation that was founded by Blacks for Blacks in 1776. It was founded here in Williamsburg. And this congregation, which began meeting in secret on outlying plantations, and I say secret, it was a large congregation. I doubt there was anything secret about these folks coming together
Right.
and worshiping. Yeah, I mean, it was vibrant, jubilant worship, and I don't think it was too secret. But by the 19th century, they established their first permanent building, their first meeting house on Nassau Street here in Williamsburg. And just quick story, that building, this meeting house, stood until 1834 when it was destroyed by a tornado. And the congregation then worshiped in a variety of different locations before coming back to the site and building a much larger, even larger church, which they worshiped in until the 1950s. When Colonial Williamsburg purchased the property, and they moved and they built another church just about a mile away on Scotland Street, where they continue to worship today. So the congregation is still here. The descendants of those who founded this church are still here. And in 2020, they approached, actually it's kind of a mutual approaching of each other, Colonial Williamsburg and the descendants in the congregation, saying the story of this church and this first meeting house is a pretty important story for the nation to know. Sadly, the site had been covered over by a parking lot in the 1960s, and so we agreed that we would conduct archaeological excavations in order to try and understand the site, find the first meeting house, but doing it all at the direction of the descendants, letting them tell us as archaeologists what did they find the most important questions that they wanted answered. So using that as our guidance, and we then proceeded to excavate the site, finding the remains of the first meeting house dating to the early 19th century, and also being able to answer the question that the community had of, are my ancestors buried there? Are there people buried there? And the answer is yes. We discovered 62 graves that was constituted a burial ground associated with the first meeting house. So we're now moving forward again at the guidance of the community we've marked each of those burials, and they'll be commemorated in perpetuity. And we're getting ready to break ground on Juneteenth, to a ceremonial groundbreaking to start recreating the meeting house as well. So reestablish that piece of property as the place where the oldest Black Baptist church was founded. I mean, that's a pretty powerful spot anywhere in America, and it'll start coming back to life here soon.
Yeah, and what a powerful moment and a perfect timing with Juneteenth, and sort of the history associated with that holiday, which we've covered previously here on PreserveCast. We'll put some links in our show notes to the previous episode on Bray, and we'll put some links where we really dig into the history, and then also put some links to our Juneteenth previous episodes. I have to ask, first, this seems like a model for the way that archaeology should work in the 21st century. And it's funny, we started with the conversation about Indiana Jones, where, I mean, that was sort of like the swindling, archaeologist that comes in and gets the cool stuff and then leaves with it. And now the kind of archaeology we're talking about is almost this like cathartic coming together and reconciling and confronting what has happened, understanding maybe there were some not so great things like covering up burial grounds with parking lots, and then saying, you know what, we're going to do better now moving forward. We're going to learn this history. We're going to let descendants lead the conversation. I mean, that seems like a very big shift. Is this something that like Colonial Williamsburg is going to offer best practices on, or talk to other sites about how they do this? Because I know there's a lot of other people around the country interested in this, but maybe they don't have the resources to throw at it or just think it through like Colonial Williamsburg might. I mean, it seems to me like this is an important story just for archaeology in general.
Yeah, absolutely. We like to think that we are models of this, but there are others that have come before us that have tackled this, and we've been able to learn from all the others who have been working on developing ways to engage with descendant communities. So I mean, I have to give credit to my colleagues at Montpelier, Dr. Michael Blakey here at the College of William and Mary, who've really pioneered working with descendants and ceding our kind of our authority sometimes over an archaeological site to descendants, which is the right thing to do. And so the First Baptist Church project has been, I think, a really good example of what happens when you start from the very beginning with that mindset. And that was one of the real advantages of this project is before we ever put a shovel in the ground, we recognize that descendants need to lead this, and we need to be prepared to step back when necessary. We need to be prepared to turn to descendants and ask for a decision to be made before we proceed. And I think that's one of the reasons why it has been, for us, it does feel like a success, because it has been successful. And I think starting at the beginning and being able to learn from those who came before. So hopefully this will be a model that others can turn to within our community.
So I need to ask a more nuts and bolts question, which is, you mentioned, and I might have missed it, but the date of construction of the original First Baptist is roughly when?
1805, roughly 1805.
Okay, so 1805, and you're talking about reconstructing it. Yeah. Is this the first non-colonial reconstruction to happen in the colonial area?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is, and I think this is just another example of a great step forward for Colonial Williamsburg as an organization, to recognize that, well, okay, we can't, if we want to tell the full story here, we can't confine ourselves to just a narrow window of time. And this story of this congregation is too important to Williamsburg, to the descendants itself, and to the nation to say, well, you know what? It's outside. It's not from the 18th century, so we can't tell the story. Well, that would be ridiculous, and it would be doing a disservice to a lot of people, our guests included, to not tell this story. So yeah, we and not to get into the nitty gritty of it, but we actually had to go to the city of Williamsburg and seek a variance, because Colonial Williamsburg had written the zoning laws for these sorts of things, and so we had to kind of go back on our own decision from years ago, and that's okay. I think that's a sign of success. I think it's a sign of us moving forward, a sign of recognizing that there's so many stories here that are important to tell, that we have to be a little flexible sometimes. But we can also fall back on, well, the congregation was founded in 1776, so they didn't move here until the 19th century. But, that's kind of a...
Yeah, no, I mean, it makes perfect sense. And I wasn't trying to point it out because I think it's a problem. I actually think, like you said, it's sort of an amazing next step for the foundation in that. And I also think that modern audiences are different than audiences in the 1930s. And modern audiences, I think, when they visit a historic site, are interested in those layers of history, in recognizing that there's a lot of stories. And archaeology at its core is a story of layers of history, actually physically the layers of history, right? So it's no surprise that an archaeologist could get behind this as well.
Yeah, that's right. As we often joke with people, we find it all. I mean, you might be looking for a certain time period, but we find it all. So and it's a disservice if we don't tell those other stories.
So for people listening who want to participate, want to, obviously maybe attend or not only that, but actually come and visit the site after they hear this, what's the experience for visitation going to be like at Bray, and how soon can they get out there and see that? And what would they see at First Baptist if they went there now, say in the summer of 2025?
Yeah, at Bray, so on Juneteenth, we'll be opening the building itself. The site has been open to the public now since earlier in the year. But the interior of the building the restoration has been completed, and it's been furnished. And it's been furnished with materials, some of them based on archaeological artifacts that were found from the site. Reproductions have now been put in based on that. So on Juneteenth, we'll cut the ribbon, and guests will be able to come into the building itself and really see and kind of start to immerse themselves into what daily life would have been like for students inside this building. And I will point out that it's free. So Colonial Williamsburg the majority of it is ticketed. You buy a ticket to go into the buildings. However, not the Bray School. The Bray School is free and open to the public. You do not need a ticket to go inside of it. Anybody can come in. And at First Baptist, or at the site of the African Baptist Meeting House, what people will see is the burials have now been marked with stone markers that are placed. Actually, they're in the shapes of hexagonal coffins, and they are placed exactly where we found the graves archaeologically. And the orientation, the placement is exactly as we found them archaeologically. We didn't try to make it orderly. We didn't try to create just one monument. Every grave of the 62 is now marked with its own individual marker, and they're sized according to what we saw archaeologically. So adults, there's a large adult marker, there's a child marker, and there's an infant marker. And when you start to see them in the patterns that they are, you can start to, we'll probably never know all the stories, but when you see an adult marker and two infant markers right next to it, that's really powerful and compelling. There's a story there, and so folks will now see that at the burial ground. But they'll also see, if they come right now, they'll see a big patch of dirt in the front of the site where the reconstruction of the meeting house is going to start taking place. So they will start to see actual construction activities happen here very soon as we begin the process of rebuilding the meeting house based on what we found archaeologically. So they'll see a combination of construction site and memorial.
That's amazing. And I think it's I think some people might be surprised listening to this, and that's the point, is that there's always something new happening at this amazing historic site that's been around for nearly 100 years now. Before we go, we got two sort of questions that we're asking most folks who drop in with us, which is, Colonial Williamsburg has really been at the forefront of talking about the 250th. I mean, I think I first heard it from Colonial Williamsburg years ago. So the 250th anniversary is the country is coming up in 2026, at least the founding of independence. Or the establishment of that declaration of that independence, which is, a story very strongly associated with everything that happened in Williamsburg. So I'm curious, what do you hope to see for the preservation community and for the archaeology community, I guess, in your position, coming out of the 250th? What is the, your best hope for the 250th?
I would love to see the preservation community. Well, we already do this, but I'd love to see the preservation community really convey to the public the importance of stewarding our resources. I mean, that's what we do. We do that all the time. But if we could double down on those efforts and by steward our resources, I mean protect archaeological sites, make sure archaeological collections, decorative arts collections, archives are all being housed appropriately, that the resources are being put to them, because if we lose them, that's it. We can't interpret history going forward if we lose these resources now. And so I guess I would like to just maybe use the 250th as an opportunity for us to say, let's double down on this so that we can continue to interpret this moment now. We can interpret what the American Revolution, say, we'll just take that one for example, what the American Revolution, what it means. And those interpretations are probably going to change as questions about it change over time, but we can't ask new questions about it if we lose our resources. And so again, I think it's a doubling down, and I have to I have to plug what we're doing at Colonial Williamsburg in that regard, which is through the creation of our new archaeology center, which you alluded to at the beginning, which is a 40,000 square foot building that will house our laboratories and our study collection, state of the art, in order to make sure that we are continuing to preserve our collection. But the key to it is also that it will be open to the public. So our guests will be able to see, actually it'll be free. Anybody will be able to see our portions of our collection. They'll be able to see what we do as archaeologists. And by that, we hope to make stewards of these, of everyone who comes in and understand this is important stuff. And here's what you can do with it. So that's kind of our commitment in 2026, with, at least in the world of archaeology, is opening up this brand new building in April of 2026.
Well, that's amazing. We'll have to have you back to talk about that when that's getting closer, because I think that's a big challenge as well for archaeology. Is so much of it is done, I don't want to say secretively, but we don't want people to go and loot the site. Right. And so as a result, it becomes sort of a secretive practice, and people don't know that these sites are sort of all around them, and how what sort of stories they tell. And if they don't know about them and they can't fall in love with them, they rarely are advocates for protecting them. So I think you're doing some important work there with the opening of this site, and sort of putting it into the public consciousness, just like Colonial Williamsburg has so many other aspects of history and historical interpretation.
Yeah. Thanks for saying that. I agree with you. It's that when people have that moment, that sometimes tangible, moment, or tactile moment, I should say, with historic resources, like I did as a kid. I mean, suddenly I'm in, I'm all in. And so if we can provide that opportunity in some way for the public to have that same tactile experience, and I don't mean being able to touch everything in our collection, but I mean, get up close, get up personal, see the real deal. And as we often say, but when we can all stand together and look at something, look at an artifact or a brick foundation in the ground, we can all look at it. We can all start to agree on one thing, maybe this one thing. Those are bricks in the ground. Okay, well, that's a good starting point for us to have discussions to spin off of that.
Yeah. I mean, at its core, archaeology is a science. It's fact-based. It's a brick or it's not.
Right.
So at least we've got that. Before we go, this is a question that normally gets people all riled up, but what is your favorite historic place or site? Obviously, you are deeply in love with Colonial Williamsburg. That's been established. But beyond that, is there a place that's special in your heart?
Of course, I will say that Colonial Williamsburg is my favorite. But if we go beyond that, I cannot not, recognize the importance of my time and what's going on at Poplar Forest, which I mentioned at the beginning. That is a really special site, and really, it's an unknown one. Not unknown, but it's not well known. But it is the work that has been done there from an architectural preservation standpoint, from an archaeological standpoint, and I think even starting now from a landscape preservation standpoint. It's right there at the top, and it should go. Take a trip to see it. You'll be impressed. So I really do. I really do think that Poplar Forest is one of those places, really special places in the world of preservation, because of what they have done and how they are continuing to do it. So my hat is off to them, and you can't thank everybody there enough for the time I spent there.
Well, it's a great way to cap the interview. Rather, hard to go wrong with a Jeffersonian site too. So we'll go with that. Jack, it's been an absolute pleasure to sit down with you. So appreciate your time and the work that you've done, not only for Colonial Williamsburg, but just the field of archaeology and getting people excited. I'm sure you're creating some more Jacks out there, and that's a good thing. So thanks so much for joining us. Looking forward to talking to you again in the future.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to PreserveCast. To dig deeper into this episode's story, head over to PreserveCast.org for show notes and our collection of previous episodes. Don't forget to engage with this podcast by subscribing, commenting, and leaving a review. Follow along on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at PreserveCast for even more. PreserveCast is currently recorded in Walkersville, Maryland, and sponsored by the 1772 Foundation, and powered by Preservation Maryland. Thanks for listening, and keep on preserving.